And now you've got a wing out there, then if that wingtip hits the water, you're definitely going over. Hope my wife doesn't see this. They invite me to go out to the front line. I don't have my pilot's license. I can't do this. And he said, well, it doesn't matter. The airplane's not legal anyway. I probably would have starved to death. I didn't know where I was. So Charlie had wrecked a J3 Cub and never reported it. So they took the N number off the J3 Cub, painted it on the side of this PC-6, and
Welcome to the Coffee in a Hangar podcast. My guest today is Jerry Jacques. I'm holding in my hand a copy of Jerry's book, No Sequel to Life. It's an incredible read. It made me cry multiple times and has some of the craziest stories I've ever heard. Jerry is probably one of the most adventurous people that I've ever heard of. In addition to being a bush pilot, he's a whitewater rafting guide, hunting guide, and a lodge owner here in Alaska. That's just scratching the surface of what Jerry's done. Now, before we get into it, I'd like to invite our loyal viewers to join our email list. We have some big announcements coming, and I want to make sure that you don't miss out. Go to coffeeinahangar.com and enter your email. Enjoy the podcast.
But you had, how many times did you run away? I mean,
I don't even know.
You had multiple attempts, and you were trying to go to Alaska
Alaska or the Yukon.
And you made it to Alaska once.
Eventually, yeah.
So can you talk about making it to Alaska?
Yeah, I'd run into this crazy Czechoslovakian immigrant by the name of Vladimir Kovalek, who was a whitewater rafting outfitter. And he was operated a little bit in Alaska and then all over Colorado on the Grand Canyon, Idaho, Middle Fork of the salmon, Maine salmon. And he mentioned that he had this trip going on in Alaska. So, but he knew that I was underage. So I hitchhiked to Alaska, wound up getting to Talkeetna, and he used to keep a trailer with his rafting gear at Don Sheldon's hangar. He was friends with Don Sheldon somehow.
And so you were 16 or something when you showed up?
At 16 when I first got there.
And did he let you work there with him? And
he let me, basically, I was a pot scrubber and a dish boy and a gopher, and could row an empty boat when there was an empty boat to just row baggage.
did he call your dad when you showed up? Or
No.
So for how long were you
He
up
figured
there?
I had permission.
So you just stayed the summer up here at 16 with no permission?
Yep.
Wow.
And then Roberta Sheldon I guess it used to be the mule shed where the mule skinner lived, just a log cabin there with no power, no running water. And the guy that was renting it, I wound up staying there. And I think the rent was $75 a month total. And so we were going to room together, and I was just going to never go home. That was where I wanted to stay. I thought this was the coolest place ever. It must have been mid-September, and the state trooper showed up knocking at the door asking for Jerry Jacques. And my dad had called the troopers, and I'm sure my brother spilled the beans where I was, my little brother, because he knew. And the trooper basically said, you got two choices, son. You can promise me that you'll go back to Anchorage on your own and your dad has a ticket waiting for you, or I can take you into custody and it'll be far less pleasant. So he asked if I'd given me my word, and I did. And I went back to Anchorage and got on a plane, went home, finished my, I guess that would have been my sophomore year in high school. And did the same thing the next year. Got to Alaska, and that time I actually got to row the Copper River with Vladimir's group. I was doing an exploratory trip on the Copper, and tried to stay again. And that time we got a call from the trooper, or the troopers. It was the same trooper.
Really?
And said, you got to go home. You're not 18. But the trooper was really cool. I'll never forget. He said, I know you don't want to go. Alaska gets in your blood. I get it. So when you're 18, you come back, and if you need help finding a place to live or help finding work, I'll help you any way I can. So it was pretty cool.
Did you use that? Did you call him up?
No, because the rafting stuff, I was...
You already connected.
Yeah.
You must have been a very useful young person. I mean, to have someone like this guy, Vladimir, that would just willing to take you and do stuff. And
I didn't mind doing anything. If you wanted me to dig an outhouse hole, clean the porta potties, just whatever I could do to be working out there in the wilderness.
Have you found a desire to help young people as a result of some of these people that helped you like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to share with me some of your first memorable experiences in Alaska?
Sure. I borrowed Vladimir's boats, which I had access to when he wasn't there, as rafts.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd heard this incredible river, and I think it was John Sharp that did the first descent. In fact, I know it was John Sharp that did the first descent of Devil's Canyon. And he portaged a bunch of it, but he was the first person ever to go down the river in one piece and survive.
Do you mind, since we're going to probably talk about Devil's Canyon a lot, explaining Devil's Canyon to people that have never been there or don't know anything about it?
Devil's Canyon's considered the Mount Everest of whitewater. It's been that way for a long time. It's a big, big, powerful river, but it's also got a lot of boulders and rocks, so it's technical and big and powerful. In the heyday of kayaking, when we were really getting the sport started, it was considered the ultimate, along with maybe the Stikine River in British Columbia.
Okay.
Now there's some rivers that are being run on occasion that are probably more difficult, but in the day it was the creme de la creme of whitewater rivers.
Can you think of a river that anyone in the world would know of, or anyone in America would know about, and kind of understand the size to compare?
Comparable volume to the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon, but probably 4 times more difficult in terms of running. The waves are as big or bigger, but it's more technical, where the Grand Canyon has got big waves and places that you have to maneuver. Devil's Canyon's got death holes in it, essentially, that if you go into, you may never come out alive. And it's got a much steeper gradient. So it's big, big, powerful water and technical moves, and you don't usually get those two things together.
Mm-hmm. It just seems so scary to me. I'm not a water guy. It's like the scariest thing in the world.
I've had friends that were surfers that say it's like the big giant waves in Australia or Hawaii and trying to surf those. That's what it's kind of comparable to, which that scares the heck out of me looking at those guys with those giant waves and surfboard going, man, they're nuts.
So back to the story, you were saying that this guy had run that. He was the first.
Heard that it had been run, and I decided that we were going to run it. I had 2 friends from high school, and we hired who I thought was Don Sheldon, but it actually wasn't. It was Jim Sharp, who had bought Talkeetna Air Taxi from Roberta. He flew us up to look at the canyon, and it was the first time I'd ever looked at whitewater that I went, I don't think I can run that. And I was the more experienced between Gary and Roger, my 2 friends. And I just had this sick feeling that this doesn't look good. And I remember thinking, boy, I don't want to disappoint Gary and Roger, but I don't know. And when I turned around and asked them, what do you guys think? I'm not sure we want to run this. They were both, yeah, absolutely. We don't want to run this. Yeah. So we're all in agreement. And Ray Genet had mentioned that the Talkeetna River might be more to what we would like, because he guided up in that area. And that looked pretty tame, which it really wasn't, but compared to Devil's Canyon, it was very tame. And so we wound up landing at Stepan Lake.
Yeah.
Then he went back for the rest of our gear and brought the rest of our gear up, because it took.
So you guys just that flight, you were dropped off on that very flight.
Yep.
Wow.
Dropped off at Stepan Lake, the lower end of Stepan Lake. We finally got the raft over all this shallow stuff dragging and got into Murder Lake. And there was an old hermit there by the name of John Ireland. And he invited us over for a cup of tea and kind of talked. And it was kind of neat. And he was really intrigued by the rafting stuff. But he told us, there's a waterfall in there that you can't get down. You'll have to carry all your gear around for miles. And we have heard this kind of stuff over and over, that these rivers aren't runnable in the rafting, and usually they were. And we'd looked at it from the air.
So in other words, you'd heard it over and over about other rivers. So you're kind of like, yeah.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. And got to the Talkeetna, and I think we were a little surprised on the volume of the river there. It was bigger than we thought. and we saw one spot in the canyon that looked like it might be class 3 at most, maybe a class 4, but probably not. And it's hard to tell from the air.
So can you, I'm sorry to make you do all this stuff because this is not a rafting podcast, but I think anyone's going to find this interesting. What's the highest class you can have?
It's class 1, which would be basically just moving flat water. The easiest. Class 6 technically means can be attempted by teams of experts only with risk of life. That's kind of the two extremes.
Okay.
So we went downstream merrily on our way. We could hear this rapid and kind of remembered the terrain from what we saw from the air and got out and scouted it. And it was an easy class 3, piece of cake. So we jumped back in the raft and on our merry way. And I think Gary was asleep, or Gary was reading a book. Roger was asleep. I'm rowing, not paying a lot of attention, just looking at eagles and looking for a moose or a bear, just having a great time, not paying enough attention, and came around a corner. And now we were committed into what the rapid we'd seen from the air, that we'd scouted the wrong rapid. Totally scouted the wrong rapid. And,
so you didn't even see the big one?
We didn't even see the big one until we were there and committed to it.
What does that mean that you're committed? You can't back out of it. You
can't get out. You're in a rock-walled little canyon, and you're going downriver one way or another.
Dude, crazy.
Kind of like landing on a really steep uphill strip that you can't outclimb. After you make that last commitment to land, you're landing one way or another.
Yeah.
Like landing on the Ruth Glacier. You're not going to go around on the Ruth. Very, very similar on some of the whitewater rivers. And so the prudent thing would have been get out, scout it, look at it, decide how we were going to run the line, if we needed to try to portage or line a boat around or what we needed to do. And just being young and dumb and cocky, we looked at that first thing and figured, that's it. It's a piece of cake, and ran it and went into what's now called the toilet blind.
That's the name. You guys were this is the first descent. So you guys discovered the toilet by accident.
What happened was, went around and realized that I couldn't make the last eddy to stop. Gary and Roger could hear it, and we all knew that we were now in trouble, or potentially in trouble.
So they were like asleep.
Yeah, and nobody was paying attention. We're just drifting downriver thinking we've got this one little rapid. We learned from that when you look at glacier water from the air, because of the grayness, it's kind of flat. You don't get that three-dimensional that you would get out of 3D, and it didn't look like anywhere near as much as it turned out, which made us even happier that we didn't go into Devil's Canyon, because we wouldn't have survived that. So we dropped into the first hole, and I got knocked out of the raft. Cycled around in there, and it felt like an hour in the water. It was probably 20 seconds, and the raft is kind of surfing in there, stopped in this hole. And apparently Gary or Roger, I don't remember which, saw my foot surface for a second and grabbed me by the foot from inside the raft, and they yanked me back in. And between the two of them, they basically yanked me back in and put me in the rowing sit and said, "Get us out of here," as the boat's kind of doing this on the verge of trying to flip and stuck in the hole. And we flushed out of the hole now with a boat full of water. And the next thing is this sharp, hard right-hand curve and a wall. We slammed into the wall because I was full of water and couldn't back away from it. I went out of the raft again for the second time. They hauled me back in and somehow managed to get through the lower half of the rapid after it comes out of the narrow spot. And afterwards, we're just like, wow, where did that come from? And we're talking, rowing. And now we're really scared of what's really below us. Or are we, did he put us in on the wrong river even? Are we back on Devil's Canyon? I mean, we were pretty confused. And Gary said to me, he said, "You know, you looked like a big turd going down the toilet that kept coming back up to the surface." And that's how it got its name.
Wow. That's how Toilet Bowl got its name.
Yep.
Wow. That's amazing. So was that it? Is that
No, there's a bunch of very continuous whitewater below, but we were on the top of our game at that point. I mean,
It was
we
a
scouted
soaked
up 2 or 3 things, and this was long before self-bailing boats, so we were constantly swamping the raft and bailing.
Had you guys scouted that, would it have been no big deal for you, or?
It still would have been a big deal at
Wow.
our level of skill and the raft. The raft was called a yampa. I think it was 15 and a half foot, but they didn't have great big tubes. They were like a 19 or 20-inch diameter tubes. So you took in a lot of water, no self-bailing. You're there with a 5-gallon bucket trying to bail. So it was a constant bail.
Not knowing anything about rafting, the idea of someone going into a situation where they're not prepared and it takes them by surprise, I mean, it reduces your skill level by like 50%. It has to. That is just so insane to me.
Yeah. And again, it was being young,
How old were you when that story happened?
17, 18.
So it was like your first, second year up.
Probably 18, yeah.
Wow.
What I've learned over the decades since is very, very few people can fly over glacier water, even world-class kayakers, and look at it from the air and realize how difficult it is. Usually they'll downgrade it by 1 or 2 grades. Later on in Devil's Canyon, when I did the Timex expedition and both flew for it and kayaked with it, there were 3 or 4 of the world's best kayakers on that team. The other guys, way, way better than I were. And they looked at it when I flew them in from the air and they just went, yeah, this is overrated. This isn't Devil's Canyon. This is just, a river up north that people really don't know what they're doing trying to run. And when they got into it, they realized this is serious whitewater. Chris Bilius, a former Olympic U.S. kayaker and owns a big kayaking school down in Chile. That was one of his comments. He said, yeah, I thought this reputation of being the Mount Everest of whitewater was either out of date or overblown or exaggerated. And after going through the canyon, he was like, yeah, it deserves every bit of that reputation.
Wow.
And that was in about 96 or 97 when that happened. Same year that the Devil's Canyon rescue happened.
I want you to tell me about that, but I think we should talk a little bit about some flying stuff.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories that I've actually told other people from your book is this guy that you kind of get involved with early on that would fly. He flew you into some gravel bar to have you help him build a strip, and you weren't a pilot yet at that time,
No.
right? What was that guy's name?
Sonny.
Sonny?
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the bush pilot that I know, And do you mind telling a couple stories about that?
Sure. I was Carl Jensen, eventually became one of the elders in Iliamna, and Sonny grew up together.
Oh, okay.
Out of Pedro Bay.
Did you know him from Jensen? Is that how you met?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly how I met. And he was Carl's best friend. They grew up together. At one point he said, yeah, I want you to jump in the airplane. We're going to go do a strip. The river's cut the strip out, and I need a strip there. I didn't know much.
Was he like a hunting guide? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he told me, yeah, when I come back, I want this amount of tools. I want a plastic sled, shovel, pick, axe, chainsaw, this prop that was hanging on the back of his fuel shed. When I got the prop, I'm looking at it, and it was all big nicks in it and just really ugly. It's like I didn't know why he wanted this ugly prop compared to what was on his Cub. And when he got back from his flight to start loading, he pulled the good prop off and put this horrible looking prop on. And again, I'm clueless. And then was strapping the good prop onto the strut. And one of the things that I'll never forget was it needed more strapping. So he took the seat belts out of the Cub, the rear seat belt, for more strapping of the prop down.
That's so funny.
And got all this stuff. I've got a chainsaw between my my
A
knees.
bunch of heavy metal behind your head,
Oh, yeah.
probably.
And off we go. And he goes up and down. He's circling, and I don't know what he's doing. There's no place he could land down there. I knew that. And the next thing I know, we're low and slow, and he stuffs the wheels on the gravel bar and the brakes, and the next thing I know, we've crashed.
Hey guys, we'll be right back to the podcast after this, but as you know, we make seat upholstery for airplanes. And I thought it would be cool to give you a tour of our seat shop that's right on the other side of this door. Let's check it out. So this is where we put all of the jobs that are in process. A lot of these are done and ready for shipping. Let's look at how they get to that point. We have patterns for hundreds of different seat models, but if we ever get a seat in here that we don't have a pattern for, the process of making that pattern is actually kind of interesting. This was out of an otter, and we just made this pattern, and so we're gonna show you the process of how that works. So over the years, we have kind of figured out what's comfortable and those shapes and sizes of lumbar and position and things like that. And so what we do is we take those measurements and those already defined characteristics, and we three-dimensionally draft those. This is Jacob, by the way. Hey. And we draft them, or he does, into the computer, and we make this thing. And then we can see how the two pieces of foam will interact and how it'll look, and we can kind of visualize how we want the cover to go on that. Then we go to the other program, and we'll actually flatten all those pieces and make the actual patterns. Once we have the patterns done, we'll cut them out on this table. This table is, a CNC. It uses a rotor blade or a drag knife that actually cuts against this surface here. And there's little holes in this surface, and there's a giant vacuum, and it sucks the material down to the table, and then it just cuts it out. So once we've cut the leather out or the fabric, that's actually only about 10% of the manufacturing process of making a seat like this. There's a lot of little steps that have to be done prior to sewing. And then once you start sewing, there's a lot of tiny little things that need to be done before all the major components come together. And this is where we do all that sewing. Each of our sewing stations has like all the raw materials that they'll need to assemble the seats, like the thread colors, all the threads, the bobbins, the Velcro and things like that. Also, a lot of our seats have decorative stitching, so like an offset larger thread just to make it like pop. And so when we do those jobs, there's two sewing machines that we'll use, one with the decorative thread and one with like the regular color thread that matches the leather. Once the covers are done, the foam will get stuffed into the covers, and they'll laminate everything together, and it'll be this beautiful finished product that's ready to install on a frame. All right, guys, that's a short tour of our shop. Thanks for watching. Back to the podcast. Remember, you can just go to sportaircraftseats.com, click on Design and Order. We have a beautiful design tool where you can see exactly what the seats are going to look like. You can play around with different options. Check it out.
Next thing I know, we've crashed. We're going through the brush, and it's like being inside of a blender. The prop is just chewing stuff up, and I know we've crashed. I think we're dead any second, and comes to a stop. And I bail out. I didn't have a seatbelt on because there was no seatbelt. I bail out of the Cub and run about 60, 70 yards and turn around. And he's just calmly sitting in the Cub, kind of looking at me like, yeah, what's going on? And I was in shock, I think. And
Yeah.
He got out and said, yeah, I planned on using the willows to get us stopped because it was too short to get in any other way. And I doubt he even had high pressure brakes. That was long enough ago that the high pressure brake boosters, he probably still had the original Cub brakes then.
Is this in like the 80s?
Yeah, early 80s. He had a big chunk of string on a spool, and he said, we've got to have, before I pick you up when we're done, the strip has to be as long as the string is long, and these two loops in it, it's got to be that wide, and that's your straight line, the string. So that's how he wanted the strip. And we basically threw all the gear out. He helped me clear a couple of the bigger rocks that he wanted moved. And then he took off with this empty Cub and left me there for, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 days. I think it was 3 days and 2 nights to cut out the rest of the alders and the willows and make a usable strip there.
Wow. So that, and was that some of your first aviation experience in Alaska?
Yep.
Did that kind of have an impact on your career as
It
flying?
did. I kind of thought it was more like the kayaking and the rafting, that it wasn't this life-threatening, dangerous thing, that you could do things like that. And he said these cubs are really tough. They're kind of built for this kind of stuff, and it probably gave me a very bad influence on flying.
Right.
Because he was a wild man, very skilled pilot, but a wild man. One of the stories that I don't know is true or not, but I heard it from Sonny, and I heard it from Carl Jensen, who I call Pop, because he was a huge influence in my life, that at one point the wind was blowing pretty strong. Sonny wanted a strip built, and they couldn't land, and Carl jumped out of the airplane while it was still flying into this big snowbank. And I can believe it, 30, 40 knot wind. And apparently Sonny had said, well, the Russians experimented with this kind of stuff and they had some success at it. And I asked Pop if he'd ever do that again. And he said, no, it hurt. And I rolled, and it wasn't good.
Pop was the one jumping out?
Pop was the one jumping out. Pop was not a pilot. Sonny was the pilot, and Pop was the guy.
And you think you think it's true, probably?
I think so.
Yeah,
I never knew Pop to lie.
I think I would do that, actually. I mean, if you have 30-mile-an-hour wind or something and you can go 10, I would jump out, hang on the thing, 5 feet in the air.
Yep.
It's crazy, though.
It is. It is.
I love it. You're talking about flying around. The reason I said that's the bush pilot that I know, meaning I think when people think of Alaska bush pilots, there's like the ones from the 20s and 30s that were like before the war, before the approaches and all the airways and stuff. And then there's the ones like that were doing the hunting stuff and just really crazy. And when I used to commercial fish, we used to fly back and forth in airplanes. And I remember thinking, there's nowhere else in the world that I would be able to do this. I was sitting on in a 206 on a propane tank, and the long skinny ones that looks like a torpedo, and I was just straddling that thing, and I'm like, he's loading it up, and I said, "Where's my seat?" All the seats are in the truck, and then I think you can sit on the fuel tank. Okay. Do I get a seatbelt? No, that's holding the fuel tank. Right. And so I was flying back, and I just kind of thought, if we crash, I'm going to die.
You're sitting on a bomb.
I'm sitting on a bomb, and I have no seatbelt. And I just thought, I'm okay with this. And I just love that. I'm not like a fan of it. Maybe people shouldn't do that, but I love it.
Yep.
Yeah. Any other stories from him that you remember?
I didn't get to be around him very long. He was actually murdered in Dalton.
Oh, no.
Mistaken identity by a jealous husband is what I hear. And shot in the back of the head with a .410 shotgun. So
wow, that's
I didn't get to be around him all that much, that one part of that one summer.
How did you learn to fly?
Larry was a big influence later on.
Larry Rivers.
You
can look back and there's an episode with him.
FAA has no statute of limitations, so I can't tell some of it. But
okay.
I did get caught flying without a license and with a passenger, and have been doing a lot of flying with no license, just barely a student pilot license. And when they caught me, they had me dead to rights. They had pictures of me in an airplane with only one wheel on the ground, me in the front, somebody in the back. And the FAA was really good to me. They told me, you've been flying a lot. We know what you're doing. It's illegal. You got two choices. We either are going to revoke your student pilot privileges for 2 years, or we'll give you 30 days to go pass your written, pass your oral, and get your check ride. And then you'll voluntarily surrender your new license to us for 6 months, and there'll be nothing on your record. And Bart Tiernan, who I'm sure you probably know, who's got the DC-6 or DC-3 that flies, he's an aviation attorney here in Anchorage. Bart was my friend that was flying for me some, and he went in with me, and the FAA guy went out, said, "You guys go talk about this deal." And walked out, and Bart said, "Are you nuts? Get back in there and take the deal before they change their mind."
Yeah.
And so I did.
Because if they had revoked your student pilot's license for 2 years, that means that you're basically grounded for
Totally
years,
grounded.
then you have to go back and start over again.
Right. And he told me that we'll be watching you, and if you start flying after we revoke it, we'll confiscate your airplane, and it'll be way worse.
What kind of airplane did you have?
It was a Cub, a 125 horse, no electric Cub.
Mm-hmm. And so you'd been flying that thing for a while, and but who had taught you?
Ron Sutphin had
Okay.
spent a bunch of time with me. It was mostly Ron, I think. And there were a couple other people involved. Anybody that had an instructor license that I could sneak time with, that would.
Yeah, you kind of were
help
like
me.
doing it on the cheap, sort of, essentially.
Yeah, I had no money. Every penny I made went back into trying to buy rafting equipment to keep building the rafting company.
So then when you got your license, now you can't do it for hire, right? Or you can't do anything.
No, but I could haul all my own gear,
Okay.
which, especially doing our long-tail Keatna trips or trips up in the Bristol Bay area, moving the gear, even with just a 125 horse Cub,
Save a lot
it
of
took
money.
a lot of flights, but I could do it on the cheap.
And get a lot of hours.
Yep.
Yeah.
Built a lot of hours.
Mm.
I think I've got about 25% more landings than I do hours.
That's pretty cool. What was your first flying job once you got your license? Once you got a commercial license?
Didn't have a commercial license. My first flying job was, there was a crazy dentist in Alaska who made good money. His name was Charlie Connell.
Okay.
And I was sitting in Charlie's chair, dental chair, getting my teeth worked on. And he asked me if I wanted to do some flying and haul some fuel to make some money. And I was like, well, yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't, because don't have my pilot's license. So I can't do this. And he said, well, it doesn't matter. The airplane's not legal anyway.
Jeez.
It was a PC-6 with a piston engine that Ron Sutphin was in charge of Air Asia, which most people think was Air America, but they called it Air Asia during the Vietnam era. And I think he was one of the main pilots from 62 to 68 or 69.
Okay.
Flying Helio Couriers, Platus Porters, and a bunch of other stuff. Well, the war was, of course, long over. He had contacts. Charlie had money, and they brought a bunch of containers full of PC-6s back, all apart. They put one together, and there was a turbine PC-6, and sold it, and that paid for the other stuff. And the second one they put together was a piston one, but it had been Air Force, and Air Force apparently never releases the airplanes after they've been wrecked, so they could never get it legal. So Charlie had wrecked a J3 Cub and never reported it. So they took the N number off the J3 Cub, painted it on the side of this PC-6, and we're hauling fuel up to their mine and supplies and everything up to the mine. And so,
where were they flying it out of?
Upper East Fork of the Chilitna River was where that mine was.
But where were they flying? Where were they? What was the
Summit Airstrip?
Where's that?
You know where this Tercero Igloo is? On this side of Cantwell.
Oh, okay.
It was an old military big airstrip. I'm assuming it's still there.
So they weren't going into Merrill or something.
No,
this airplane?
no. That airplane never came back here. They used it like you would an old tractor.
When you say it never came back, is it?
I'm sure it never went
somewhere
to anywhere where they might get ramp checked or somebody would see it.
What happened to it in the end?
Charlie eventually wrecked it there, and they buried it. They pulled everything they could that was salvaged out of it and dug a hole with the backhoe and buried it.
So it's buried by his mine.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that is crazy. So you flew that?
I flew that with hauling fuel. Ron,
how much experience do you think you had when you were flying that thing?
Maybe 400 hours.
Oh, wow.
So not a lot.
But I mean, that's considerable.
Yeah, and
that's when you started flying it?
Yeah. Ron basically.
So this is before. Sorry, sorry to pry.
Go
This
ahead.
before the FAA got to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I just had the student license at that point. I think I'd just gotten my student license at that point because I flew for quite a while without the student license. And so Ron basically put in a full load of fuel and flew it up to the mine, kind of showed me what was going on, and then threw me in the left seat and started flying medium loads up until he was comfortable with me, and then basically turned me loose. He said, "You're going to fly this many," I don't know how many gallons it was because there's no measurement, but you had a stick you could measure the tank. So you're going to fly this much for your first 10 or 20 flights, and you're going to fly to this much more and just continue adding the fuel until we were hauling full loads.
Oh, got it.
So it was kind of,
So it was kind of, he was training you without being there. It's sort of,
well,
here's your criteria.
I probably had 6-7 hours with him in the right seat, with him teaching me how to fly the Porter. And the Porter's a great flying airplane, although it's pretty gutless with a load with the, I think it's GO 540 or IGO 540.
So forgive me, because when people are throwing names at me that I don't know, everything starts bleeding together.
Mm-hmm.
Ron was the guy that flew for Air America or
Right.
organized Air America?
And by the time that he was here, he was flying for one of the major airlines.
Got it.
I think Japan Airlines or Korean Airlines.
So he was very experienced, knew what he was doing. He had experience with this.
And it's CFI. He was it was Korean War pilot, flew in Vietnam some, was just an amazing pilot. I think when he retired, he had like 47,000 hours. And flew everything from, his first airplane was a J3 all the way up to, flying the 747s across to Asia.
What a crazy deal, huh?
Yeah.
How do you feel? I mean, like looking back on it, how do you feel about that whole experience? And like, what would you tell like a young person listening to this that might idolize that sort of the way that all went down?
The FAA and the rules and regs are really there, most of them for pretty good reason, to take you in good gradual steps.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some good gradual steps, but what I lacked was the ground school and a lot of the background. I didn't have enough knowledge to do other than these very specific things. I couldn't talk on a radio. I couldn't, there was so much I didn't know that I should have known.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the processes we have now, it's there for a reason.
Had you needed to divert to somewhere, that would have been a big
or
thing.
Even gone on an basic instruments for 90 seconds in the clouds.
Yeah,
I'm sure I'd have lost spatial requisition and been upside down and gone.
Right.
But thankfully, both Ron and the other people gave me very specific parameters, and I stuck to them. Like, you're going to fly when the weather's good. You're not going to take off if the weather's below that ridge line. Just period. You're not going to do it.
Right.
And so that was good experience. But until I actually started really studying for my private, I couldn't believe how hard that private written exam was and how much I didn't know. I mean, I was just like,
here you are with 500 hours and you're just totally, it's crazy.
Yeah, it was, and we all know some of that written stuff is just busy work, but there was so much that was in there that was very valuable.
I love that you shared that story here, because there's so many people flying around in Alaska that don't have a pilot's license.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of people. And for someone that did that and that came into legitimacy, to go back and talk about that is really powerful.
There's always rules that don't make sense, but
right.
I think in general, it's a good process. I think it really prepares us for things that we don't know that might come. As you said, going into an alternate that there's no way I would have known what to do in Merrill Field, especially without a radio. I didn't know what a green light or a red light was. There was just all this stuff that I've used over the years that if I'd never got caught by the FAA and kept doing it as a bootleg, I'd have probably either got myself killed or it certainly would not be anywhere near where I am today with aviation, and then got legitimate jobs out of it down the road.
Yeah. You've had some real legitimate, interesting jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Before the story with the landing on the gravel bar and running through the bushes,
Mm-hmm.
you had met who you call Papa.
Mm-hmm.
What's his first name again?
Carl Jensen.
Carl Jensen. You'd met Carl Jensen, and the story of how you met the Jensens, I think, is really interesting because you were living in a trapper's cabin.
Yep. Yeah.
Why did you choose to go live in a trapper's cabin?
Well, I knew where it was. Basically,
It's over by Iliamna?
yeah, was high up on the Iliamna River.
Okay.
I figured I could go live there for free, and I could become this mountain man that I really wanted to do, and I could become a trapper. And I'd heard stories about how lucrative trapping could be. Turned out I was not a very good trapper. Didn't know anything about how to properly prepare a pelt. My first trapping season, I basically turned in garbage to one of the fur buyers in Anchorage, and he's paid me maybe 10 or 20 cents on the dollar of what it would have been if they were good, well prepared. And I think that was probably a gift. But he brought me into the back room and had one of his people show me how to do things right.
But you had put so much work into it. That must have been devastating.
It was. But that spring, I was literally starving to death. I hadn't brought enough food. The cabin in looted by porcupines, and a lot of the stuff was broken into, and so anything that wasn't in a metal container was gone, food-wise. And I didn't know where I was in terms of where I could go find a way out. I just thought I was stuck there. And spring, I probably would have starved to death in the early spring. We had a fairly good snowpack and a reasonable amount of water. And Kevin Jensen, Carl's son, was out exploring in a boat and had gone as far up the Iliamna River with prop that he could, and he saw smoke coming out up the river, and he was just kind of out there what a lot of the native kids do, just exploring and learning the country on his own. And he walked upriver till he found the cabin and found me there. I had some green moose meat still hanging on a pole from a moose that I'd poached for food, but it had warmed up, and that you have to cut away the green to get to meat that was decent underneath. And he kind of looked at what I was eating, and I was filthy and had what would have been good mountaineering clothes, which I found out don't do so good in the woods for trapping. They were shredded. And he talked me into going back to his parents and getting a couple good meals. And we still talk about this because Carla, who's still alive, has become my adopted sister. I couldn't be closer to Carla as if she was my biological.
That was his sister?
That was Kevin's younger sister. So we hiked down the next day. Kevin spent the night, hiked down the next day to the boat, went down the Iliamna River and up around the edge of the lake over to Pedro Bay. And we walk in, and his parents, Carl and Marge, were looking at me as we walk in. And Kevin kind of looks at me and he looks at them and said, "Look, Mom, a stray gussock followed me home. Can we keep him?"
Now, what does that term mean?
Gussock means white guy. And they just kind of looked at me, and I knew I was filthy, dirty, and shredded. And Ma got up and said, "You look like you need a meal," and immediately went to the kitchen and started food and brought me some homemade bread. And they just kind of adopted me and took me in as part of their family.
Man.
And then I learned an amazing amount from both Kevin, who was younger than I was, and then Pop, of course.
Like what kind of things did you learn from them?
Like always have multiple sources of getting a fire going. Leave a cabin, always leave the firebox cold and build all the makings of a fire so it just takes one match to get the fire going. Because if you walk in there and you're hypothermic and cold, you may not have the dexterity to get a fire going.
Did you have an experience like that?
One winter trapping. fell through the ice about up to here in the water, was soaking wet. It was well below zero. And there was a cabin that I didn't own, didn't even know who owned. When I ran to the cabins. I was on cross-country skis. I got the skis off, threw them on, left my gear, and there was only about that much snow on the ice. And so I could run back on my backtrack to where I'd passed this cabin. And I remember seeing the lock as I was running to it, and I just hit the door full speed with my shoulder. Broke the door off. Later on, I could see the piece of string and the key hanging right next to the lock. It was locked just to keep animals out. And the firebox was that way. There was a mason jar, clear mason jar with strike anywhere matches on top of the wood burning stove. And when I opened the door, it was paper. It was everything, just one match and into there.
That is incredible.
And I say it was 38 below, and I can't remember whether I had a thermometer in the cabin, or I had one of those little thermometer keychains, but I believe it was 38 below.
Wow. That wasn't the summer, or sorry, that wasn't the winter, that first winter.
That one was in the Talkeetna Mountains a different time.
How many winters did you trap?
About 2.5, really.
So this was the winter after.
Yeah.
Yeah. What other things did they teach you?
A lot of respect for the wildlife. Pedro Bay, when somebody shot a moose, every able-bodied person in the village would go out and pack that moose meat down. And I'm talking femur bones, rib bones, everything was brought out, and they utilized everything. There was zero waste. You got an animal, most of the internals you're throwing away, the intestines you're not utilizing, the nose you're not going to utilize. They utilized everything, including the bones to make soup out of. And the other thing I think was just how important the salmon are. All the life revolves around the salmon.
Yeah, totally.
They called the spring the starving months, because both the animals that have survived winter and people are most likely, if they're going to starve to death and die, in that April time period, April, early May, before the fish have returned, before you're starting to get the ferns and some of the edibles up. And so they're waiting for the fish, and it's so important. Those days, nobody seemed to talk about, or I don't even know that biologists talked about the nutrients that the dying salmon put into the water. But they knew that. The Jensens knew that, hey, yeah, these dying fish are what is feeding the other fish. It's fertilizing the whole ecosystem. Yeah. And I never heard biologists back in the late 70s, early 80s talking about that. Mm-hmm. Now we know that. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I think is interesting is when the fish arrive, there's nothing else that's more important than them putting up the fish.
Yep.
Kids that are in college or doing jobs, whether it be the Middle East or New York City, they all come back to help with putting the fish up, catching the fish, the subsistence fish, taking care of it, processing them.
Amazing.
And it's this strong family culture, which is so lost in so much of our society today. Yeah. That, they come back and they help with the fish processing, and nothing else matters. You're well off if you've got a good supply of fish that you put up in the summer to get you through the winter and keep you from starving.
That's amazing. I never thought about it like that. Nothing else matters except for those fish. Yeah, if you don't take advantage of that gift, you're not going to survive. Yeah. Man, there's so many lessons to take from that, actually. What are some of your most memorable flying experiences?
Well, the Devil's Canyon rescue is probably the both satisfying at the end and scariest because it lasted so long.
Do you want to tell me what happened?
The Timex expedition, had some of the world's best kayakers, which I was not.
Is Timex like the watch company?
The watch
Time?
company.
Okay.
Yep.
So they'd sponsored.
They sponsored this big expedition. They started at the far end of South America, doing these great rivers kayaking and filming, and moved their way north. South America, Montana, Idaho, and then Alaska. And I knew nothing about it. I got a call one day from somebody asking me if I could do the flying to get them into Devil's Canyon for a kayak expedition and help with the logistics, because they had a lot of things they didn't have. And I had my 135 certificate in Talkeetna, hangar there. And I was like, sure. And so, well, you really know what Devil's Canyon is? Because again, so many people from the lower 48 and kayakers looked at Alaska as a backward whitewater community.
Got it.
And
so they thought, these guys don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. And then when I heard who these guys were, it was like, oh, well, yeah. But they were a little overconfident and didn't know the wilderness aspect of it. So I agreed to do the flying and supply them with generators and different stuff for the organizing of the expedition, because it was a filming crew. And then at some point got invited to join them, kayak with them.
Were you known enough in the kayaking community that people were like, oh, Jerry, he's legit? Or did you have sort of clout?
Yeah, I guess I was. I had the rafting business and kayaked, and one of my best friends who had done a lot of first descents with up here is named Rob Lesser. And Rob was the first kayaker inducted in the Kayaking Hall of Fame.
Oh.
So, being a friend and having kayaked with Rob Lesser probably gave me more credentials than I really deserved.
Got it.
And that's, I'm sure, how they found me, is probably through Rob, because he was one of the first people to ever actually kayak Devil's Canyon. Barney Griffin was actually the first, but on the same expedition was Rob, and everybody else in the crew had to be helicopter rescued. This was an ABC expedition.
So they invited you to go on it?
Yeah. And I think he may have even been a little bit joking when he first said it. I don't think he really knew my kayaking career. I kind of went, well, I haven't been boating a lot, but yeah, I'd like to get back in there. And I'd done Devil's Canyon a few times at that point. So I did the flying, got them in, dropped them all off by Cub, showed everybody the canyon low level. When they finally got on the ground and looked at this Devil's Creek Rapid, all of a sudden they got respect for what they were looking at. Like, this is big and this is serious. This is way more than we thought it was going to be. And looked at the different possible routes. And there was one route that's the most conservative, and it's still very difficult. And so we decided that's what we're going to do. Chris Spelius and I were the first to launch. And we went on down, and we made what we call the crux move, where pretty much all you had to do is paddle right and you were through Devil's Creek Rapid. I'd been there a couple times before, and the big stuff was on the left. And I looked at that in the eddy with Chris, and I said, let's do that. We're here. I think we can do it. And Chris looked at me and said, you're nuts. No, just no. And foolishly, I peeled out of the eddy, told him, well, I'm going to do it, and went in it and got trashed. Just ultimately destroyed my kayak even.
You made that decision while you're paddling? Like, we're
in an eddy. So we're stopped in an eddy, looking down where, and you could see that way is this big giant stuff up against the wall and these big holes. You had to miss the holes on the left, but there was these giant, neat looking waves that I thought we could kind of not cheat the river, but run the meat of it. Or we could just paddle right and miss the waves kind of in the back of these eddies. And so
jeez,
they've got some great footage on the movie of me just getting absolutely trashed in there. Going end over end backwards, the big wave hole collapsing in on me. It was not a good decision. And I got separated from my boat, which as a kayaker, you never want to be out of your boat. And was swimming for my life. Finally, it was the highest at that time that river had ever been run, water volume wise, which gives it the most power.
What was the number? What do they call it? The
CFS. I think it was around 32,000 CFS. So it was high. I'd only run it in like that 12,000 CFS the times I'd been in there.
That's a significant difference, isn't
It's
it?
a huge difference. Yeah. And below there was the rapid that we thought we probably weren't going to run. It's called Hotel Rock. And Hotel Rock was completely underwater. It was just this one giant recycling hole. If you went into there, you would not come out alive. Very unlikely. I washed down, lost my kayak, lost my paddle, was swimming for my life, trying to get to the eddy. And this is 3/4 mile downstream from the last of the Devil's Creek Rapid. Go through a rapid they call the Nozzle, which just this river narrows and it's a big hole, and I flushed through that. But now I'm still trying to get to shore, and I know that Hotel Rock and the giant holes below me, and I finally get into this big eddy, but I can't get to shore. The river's so powerful, I can't get to shore. And the eddy keeps bringing me to the top of the river and recycling me. And each time I get a little farther from the shoreline and I'm swimming for my life. And I'm at the edge of exhaustion, lack of oxygen, about ready to pass out, trying to get to shore. And I finally make that last loop, and I realize this next cycle, I'm going to be in the current and I'm going down, and I'm not going to make it. And I was praying, and I was thinking more of at the time, he was probably 3-year-old son, and I was a single parent, and that scared me more. And I just said, I'm gonna keep trying. It's hopeless. But I kept trying, and it made me one more cycle, and I was in the main current. And the helicopter showed up, the filming helicopter that was there. And at the last moment, I had taken a gallon oil jug from my hangar, filled it with water, and put a heavy throw rope on the other end, thinking that they could throw it out of the helicopter if somebody was needing rescue, and the rotor wash wouldn't blow it around.
So you just kind of, hey, let's throw this in here, kind of an afterthought at the hangar.
Yep. And the videographer whose name was Robbie, he said the first time in his entire filming career, he dropped a camera and went running to the helicopter because he knew I was in trouble. And this was up high. The helicopter had fired up and came down, and they threw me the rope literally as I was in the main current heading downstream with no chance of catching the eddy, heading straight towards Hotel Rock. And he couldn't lift me out. He didn't want to lift me out of the water because the rope wasn't the right one. There's protocols for how they do that. But he was able to tow me to shore. And I got my hands on the rock and was still not able to get out. I was so weak at that point, I couldn't get out of the water. And the surges were coming up because that river is surging 3-4 feet. And I was about to get pulled back in the water when two strong hands grabbed me. And I think it was Dean Cummings and Corin Addison, who hadn't run the river yet, had run downstream all the way. And they pulled me the rest of the way out. And as soon as they got me above shore, I passed out. I was just done. Probably 30 minutes, 40 minutes later, they finally were able to load me back in the helicopter, which the helicopter had saved my life without a doubt. There's no doubt that everybody on that team that did the things they did saved my life. Putting the camera down, Corin Addison and Dean Cummings running as hard as they could to get there and help pull me out of the water. The helicopter pilot with almost no room on his rotor wash because it's narrow in there, or on the edge of his rotors. All of them just did everything possible and saved my life.
Well, risking their lives big time.
Yeah, they all were risking their life to help me.
So this is sort of the backdrop of this other crazy story. Man, dude, this has got me like tearing up thinking about your son and stuff. So this is just the preamble to the story. I mean, this is a very important story too, but so what happened?
My kayak was stuck in a hole downstream in that Hotel Rock, and we could see it from the helicopter. It was tumbling in there, stuck in there. and it never left during the whole time they were finishing the filming. It was stuck in there this whole time.
Just floating around and
Just stuck in the hole.
wow.
Eventually washed out, and we eventually got what was left of it. It was completely destroyed. They finished filming the expedition. They get some great footage. It's a big part of the Timex movie. And then I'm back home. I'm doing my flying. I'm doing my guiding. And I get a call from some of the best kayakers in the state. They wanted to run Devil's Canyon and wanted me to fly them. And now the water is at a bit more reasonable level. It's still high, but not that giant high. Probably like 24,000, which is way higher than I'd survived in there. And so I fly them upstream, drop them off, and I don't remember whether I used my Cub. I did. I used the Cub and tied the boats underneath, and they had all their logistics planned, and I wasn't particularly worried about them, but I showed them a couple alternate spots to that if we needed to get out, somebody lost a boat or something. Went about my business, and the next day or 2 days later, whatever it was, two of the kayakers show up. I think there was three of them total. Two of the kayakers show up at the hangar and said, buckwheat stuck up in the canyon. He had to swim, lost his boat, and he's up there with, no boat, no paddle, no survival gear.
What time of year is this?
September. Cold. So I don't know anything other than where he was. And so a rafting guide that worked with me, also hunting guide Jim Hendricks, he and I helped the other team put a bunch of gear together, and we were going to drop it out of the Helio Courier, try to find buckwheat and drop him some survival gear, as well as a Pulaski axe and machete and some stuff to clear this old airstrip that's kind of in the middle of the canyon, which I told him, walk down to there and we'll clear that. You can clear it with the tools that I'll drop you, and I can land a Cub. Well, it turned out he couldn't get out of the canyon. It was just too tight of a canyon. He tried a couple times and he couldn't. So he returned back to where he was. The meantime, Jay Hudson is flying. Jay finally manages to find him up where the other team had left him. Dropped him a radio and I think some basic survival gear. I didn't really know what was going on because I'm flying. Jay and I are talking on the radio because I'd spent the night up at my cabin up in the higher above Devil's Canyon, so I'd run out of daylight. This was after dropping the gear that buckwheat never got to.
So you dropped the gear at the runway.
Dropped the gear
downriver from where he is.
Yeah, it's like 5 miles downriver.
Wow.
Thinking he could walk the shoreline, get out of the canyon, but he couldn't get out of the canyon, couldn't get to it.
Yeah.
So he's still stuck there. Jay has taken his Cub and dropped a radio, and told him to wait there. The state troopers will be there in a helicopter to rescue. Well, I guess one helicopter got wrecked, and the other one was working on the rescue, and it was over at Teslina Lake or somewhere over the copper drainage, and they weren't going to come.
And the weather was
the weather was horrible. It was cold, fog in the morning, rain. It was that your classic mid-September moose hunting weather. And here's a guy stuck in a canyon. He's been beat up in whitewater, which I could relate to because I'd been there a few months before or a month before, and he's got nothing. At the time I didn't even think he had fire or anything. When I find out that the troopers aren't coming, at least for a day or two, and I know we've got a storm coming in, which means that you might be fogged in there for another 3-4 days, and you're not going to survive that. Hypothermia is going to set in. So I wound up jumping in the Helio Courier, put on a full wetsuit, put a couple of MREs in the back of the wetsuit, just so I knew MREs have got matches in them and food. Had the wetsuit on, and I had an idea that there was a long enough, straight enough section that I could possibly land in there.
What kind of airplane was it again?
Helio Courier on floats. And thankfully it was on 3,500 PKs, which are not as good at performing, but they're a tougher float than the Ito 3430s. They're just built a little tougher. I made a couple passes and could see buckwheat, and to me, I thought he had a aviation radio. Jay had dropped him a CB, and he wasn't responding to me on the radio. And I'm thinking, this is bad. He's hypothermic enough. He's just sitting there kind of waving at me. I'm going, he's not going to make another night. The troopers aren't going to make it in for a day or two. His only chance of surviving is if I land. And I'm looking at the canyon, and having rafted and kayaked through that section, thought maybe I could actually just put the airplane down. And in hindsight, it was a foolish decision, but I'm glad I did it. I decided I was going to land, and you land upriver, full flaps, got the helio as slow as I could. As I mentioned before, glacier water tends to blend in, and it's hard to see your depth perception of how big these waves are. And initially, I was just kind of skipping from rolling wave to rolling wave top, and it was okay.
Were you kind of doing an inspection pass of sorts
I'd
at
done
this point?
Had
Or
done
were you landing?
a couple up high, and then decided I'm going to land. I can do this. You know, it's somebody that I'm friendly with, wasn't a close friend at the time, but who, you know, is in the same position I was, that his life is on the line, and I'd just had my life saved by the Timex crew and the helicopter pilot just a short time before. So felt like it was just my absolute commitment and duty to try this. So as I'm backing off on the power, I was skipping from the wave top to wave top. It was pretty slow, and I think, okay, this landing's going to work. I backed off on the power a little bit more, and I went between the rollers, and the airplane just came to this sudden stop. I mean, like hitting a wall. And Buckwheat later said the airplane completely disappeared. He thought it was gone underwater. And somehow those floats, it surfaced, and we came out. He said it was just this big wall of water and no airplane that he could see. And it came out, it slammed me forward hard enough, and I think it was because of the life jacket giving way into the seatbelt, because there's extra there. I hit my head on the flap handle and hit my head pretty good and hard, which cut it and started actually letting some blood into my face that I didn't really realize. But now I'm going backwards down the river at probably 30%, 40% power, and I have to give it full power to get moving forward. And I finally get over onto the more slack current into the eddy and get up to where Buckwheat was. Open the door, and I yell at him, "You got 60 seconds to get in the airplane or I'm leaving you."
That's not what they said you said in that podcast.
That's probably a cleaned up version. I'm sure it is. And I'm sure what Buckwheat heard was legit.
Okay. By the way, just a little break here. This entire story, if you're having a hard time believing it, like to the listener here, the entire story is told on a podcast that I will link in the description of this video, where there's 5 different people telling their side of this story. And Buckwheat is in there telling it. Sorry.
Being a whitewater kayaker and a raft guide, he understands where your angle of your boat, which an airplane on floats is essentially now a boat, sits. And if you get too low, the current will catch you and flip you over. So Buckwheat understood that, and we call it high siding in a raft, where you go to the opposite side of where the current is to try to keep that edge up. Well, the first thing that happened is after he got in the airplane, I started giving it the power, and we were on the rocks. We were actually stuck. And I think he had to get out, start rocking up and down on the floats, me giving power, and there's that horrible aluminum scraping sound that every float plane pilot dreads to hear. That
Yeah.
And you're just going, oh. Got off the rocks, got moving. He jumps back in the airplane, and I yelled to him, when we make this eddy turn up here, I first tried to take off upriver and couldn't do it.
Yeah.
There was just way too much current. Even with a Helio Courier empty with fairly light on fuel, couldn't do it. So then I knew I'm going to have to make what we call an eddy turn, where you're in the slack current and you go out into the main current. Well, when you turn into the main current, if that upstream edge catches, it's going to roll you potentially over. And now you've got a wing out there. Then if that wingtip hits the water, you're definitely going over.
Mm-hmm.
And I yelled at him. He's in the back. I said, when we make the eddy turn, you need to high side, which he knew instantly what that meant. And now I think he's having big second thoughts about being in the airplane. I found out later he was having second thoughts about getting in the airplane to begin with, because he knows what this canyon we're in. And I'm committed. So we make this eddy turn to the left, and I scream high side, and he didn't even have to hear me. He knew what and when to do that. And that right wing and that float started dipping into the current. And I'm looking out with full power, full left rudder, water rudders down, everything that plane could do. And thankfully it's a left turn. Mm-hmm. And that wingtip wasn't this far from the water when we finally came around. And now we're heading downstream. Of course, everything levels out. And it's just like, wow.
Now you've got to go. It's like
there's commitment.
It's going to go either way.
We're going downriver. And even with that eddy turn, we were going downriver, either in the airplane upside down or in the airplane right side up. There was no other option. We've got the current helping you go faster. The Helio got off the water pretty quick. I was pleasantly surprised. And then it wouldn't climb. It would not climb. And below us, a mile or so, mile and a half, is a rapid they call screaming left-hand turn, where the whole canyon makes this left turn. I think both when I hit so sudden stop in the big waves and the rocks, but probably more that sudden stoppage, loosened every rivet in the float. Those floats were just loose, and they were full of water.
And maybe the rocks.
I have the rocks. The right side was a little worse than the left, but the left float never hit anything, and it still had significant structural damage to the floats. So they both had water in it. And as it's not flying, I think I'm asking buckwheat and trying to look out because it's not climbing, and I know what we've got ahead of us, this hard, sharp left turn, and I realize I've got water in the floats. I'm heavy. It won't climb. And we finally get to the narrows, and we're probably only 50, 75 feet above the river at this point. And I've got full max continuous power, maybe even more than that. And the only thing I can do is try to make the turn. And I roll the plane as hard as I can on that left edge, get that wing up, and it just is buffeting and staggering around the corner. And that right wingtip there's brush there. We're kind of above the rock and where the brush line is, but it's still a fairly narrow canyon. And I think we're going to hit, to be honest. I thought that right wing was going to hit and it was going to cartwheel us in. And just every bit of rudder and just the plane is just buffeting. And I think any other airplane but a Helio would have stalled and spun on me. I don't think anything, not a Beaver, a Cub we would have wrecked in the whitewater. It wouldn't have survived the landing. I think the Helio was the only airplane that could have made that work. And we finally came around the corner, and now it's pretty straight again and leveled out. And I think those floats are now leaking. All the water that seeped in from all that damage is now spreading water, and we've got a stream of water behind us. And slowly it starts to get lighter and starts to climb. And eventually we get out of the canyon, and I radio ahead because everybody knew that I was going to maybe do this rescue. And Eric Dinkwalter and Terry Mangione, who were my mechanics at the time, they did all my mechanic work, I should say, at Eric's shop, radioed and said, "Hey, have Eric and Terry meet me at the beach at Christensen Lake, because I'm going to have to beach the airplane. It's going to sink if I don't. I can't go to my dock." And land at Christensen Lake, kept it on the step, beached it at probably 10, 15 mile an hour onto the beach. And Eric and Terry, throw some ropes on so it can't slide back down. And there's still water in the float, though not as much. And buckwheat, all of it, the other kayakers and everybody's there to meet him. And, it's just this big kind of celebration that everybody's still alive and everybody's united. And 15 minutes later, it's like, well, we've got to be at work. Buckwheat had to be back at his, he had a whitewater kayaking and rafting school in Denali Park. And so everybody kind of goes their different ways.
Wow, weird.
And Eric and Terry come up to me and said, your airplane's grounded. Those floats need a lot of work, and we've got to really go through the airplane to make sure it's even safe to fly again. And I think they took 4 or 5 days to get it back together, and those floats were never the same. They leaked like a sieve, and I think actually we wound up pulling it off of floats and putting it onto wheels for the remainder of the season. And then Buckwheat spent a bunch of both time and of his own money to help repair the floats.
Really?
Yep.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's kind of some samplings of your Alaska career, flying career. But you have a whole nother side of flying. Can you talk to me about that? How would you phrase that?
State Department
State
or
Department?
different alphabet agencies.
Okay. And do you want to, you said at the beginning that you would like to talk about the Ukraine thing.
Okay. Well, that actually has nothing to do with flying, or I didn't do any flying over there.
Oh, really? Okay.
Ukraine airspace is completely closed. Even
when did you go over there?
I've been over there 3 times since the war started, about a week after it started, about 5-6 months after that, and then another 6 months or so. So I made 3 trips, a couple trips for about 6-8 weeks, and then the last trip for maybe 3-4 weeks.
Okay.
Went over there, was driving from Poland, delivering humanitarian supplies into Ukraine up near the front lines, and then bringing refugees back to Poland to the refugee centers. And then the second and third trip, I was over there teaching long-range marksmanship, which has been another hobby of mine, competition long-range shooting.
Got it.
And got to work with Ukraine sniper teams. And despite making a promise to my wife that I wouldn't be anywhere near the front lines, I wound up in the trenches with the snipers for quite a while.
What?
Yeah.
Why? Why did you how?
It wasn't planned. I was supposed to go over there, and every male that I've ever met in Ukraine is serving the country in one way or another, fighting the Russians. If they physically can't do it, they're doing something else. I've never seen a group of people so united in my life as that country. And I've been in the trenches with Muslim men, next to Jewish men, next to Christians, next to atheists, and all just totally focused and united on, this is our country. We've fought for our freedom. We finally got it. And we're not going to let Russia take it away and genocide us, because they know that's what's going to happen if they lose. So the second trip, after getting arrested in Poland for bringing the weapons I was bringing over there to donate to them.
You got arrested?
Got arrested, spent a night in a Polish jail. And
you were bringing, sorry, man, everything you're saying is just, I've got to let my brain catch up for a second. You were hauling weapons in, on a truck or
No, I brought 2 sniper rifles, 2 high-end sniper rifles, one that a friend of mine had donated, and one of my sniper rifles.
Okay, so you're just carrying them, and you're carrying, or checking them.
They're in a carry-on case.
And so then they arrested you.
They arrested me. What should have happened is I had all the correct paperwork. I was officially part of the Ukraine military in terms of being an instructor for them, not in the military, but officially being there to help as a volunteer. Had all their correct paperwork, and a month before that was all we would have needed. But Poland was getting nervous about weapons and this and that, and they had put their own paperwork, and I didn't have that. And somehow they missed it when I went through customs in Poland. I think they thought my case was a golf case. because it wasn't a flat case. It was a tough pack, I think they call it, which looks like a golf container. And they let me through with these 2 rifles and a bunch of ammo. When we tried to cross the border from Poland into Ukraine, I had the Ukraine paperwork, but not the Polish paperwork. And the Poles were really professional and actually kind, but they had to arrest me, strip search me twice, confiscated all the weapons, and spent the night in jail, private cell. So they like I say, they were being kind. And they told me a couple times, we know you're trying to do the right thing. We know you're trying to help our neighbors, but our laws have changed and this is illegal. We'll have to get it sorted out with a judge noon the next day. So 30 hours after I'd been arrested, I'm there with one of their judges and a couple interpreters. And the first thing he said is, this is a mandatory 8-year sentence. And I went from not being very nervous to about pooping my pants. Thinking 8 years in a Polish prison did not sound good. And then he kind of smiled and he says, look, I know you're doing the right thing. The Ukraine military is threatening to invade to get you back because you were there to help them, and we've arrested you, and they're breathing down my neck.
Really?
Yeah. Because they're out waiting on the other side of the border, expecting to pick me up with some pretty high-end equipment and going to do some instruction for the long-range shooting. And he just says, look, this is going to take us some time. What you've done is illegal, but we've already found out that our security at the other end shouldn't have let you through without the paperwork. It should have just turned you around. So it's a little bit our mistake, you not knowing, Ukraine military not knowing. And about midnight that night, they finally let me go, and with all the stuff, and I got to cross.
You got your weapons back.
Yep, got to cross the border, and I thought I was just going to do an instruction class in Lviv, which is a western town, relatively safe. They occasionally get a rocket attack, but relatively safe in Lviv. The unit that wanted the equipment, was on the front lines. About an hour and a half, 2 hours past Kyiv. So they asked me if I would go and meet the team and give them the equipment and give them some instruction on it. And the young lieutenant, who was not part of the sniper team, but could speak English, who was driving me, said, yeah, we'll meet, and then everything will be good, and you can, we'll take you over to our sniper school, big central school, which is well away from the front line, and you can teach your class there. Wow. So I thought, okay, this works. Well, I got there, we went to the sniper team, met them, and they're so grateful for anybody that goes over there to help, whether it be a German or American or Canadian. They're amazingly grateful, and it really has found out it's a big morale boost when people are over there wanting to help and understanding what Russia is doing, which is they want to genocide the Ukraine people. They want to wipe the Ukraine people out and have the resources. It's pretty plain. Meet the sniper team next day or 2 days later after I get over the jet lag and a night in jail. We go out to their sniper school, and I spend a day at the course with them, kind of explaining how these different scope systems work and some of the neat technology we have that they've heard about, but they don't have much of it. And back to the house, well, we're 6 kilometers from the front line, and half this 26-man team is always in the trenches there, and the other half is in the house. And they rotate every 24 hours, and they've got a doctor in the house, and the snipers are literally hunting for Russians, and as well as if there's an invasion that comes, they've got their explosive guy with the anti-tank mines and belt-fed machine guns, and it's right on. Those lines go kind of back and forth, and then hope my wife doesn't see this. They invite me to go out to the front line and actually go into the trenches, and they show the the people that are part of the team some of this new equipment and get to know people. And I think for them, it wasn't so much what I was bringing to the table as it was a morale boost that, yes, there's people that
you're willing to go out there and
aren't
be
Ukraine that are willing to support what we do. And so I wound up literally on the front lines and some shooting going on. And I learned a lot more from them than they learned from me. The long range shooting and the hunting, my hunting background leads a lot towards snipers, but they've developed techniques that, they're really good at what they do, and unbelievably committed. One of the issues is the suicide drones that are actually built in Iran that are very prolific over there that they're using. And they've got like a 6 or 8 hour hang time that they can be airborne. And if they don't find a high value target, they just crash into a church or a car or whatever soldiers they can to make sure they get some damage out of it. And they've got thermals. And something that I learned in Afghanistan that the Afghans did to get into our FOBs was we had state-of-the-art $30,000, $40,000 thermal imaging. And what the Afghanis would do is they would take sticks and build like a turtle shell, and they take double bubble wrap that they steal out of our dumps and line 2 or 3 layers of bubble wrap and then tape bubble wrap to their hands, their elbows, their knees, and their feet, and then camouflage over all that bubble wrap on this turtle shell. And they get in it and they just slowly crawl across the open until they got to your fence line and they could dig under the fence line.
What does all that do?
The thermal imaging, it displaces the heat and you can't see that there's a person down there.
Oh.
So it's a way of camouflaging your thermal signature. And I told them about that, and it was like instant. And this is what I don't think would happen in our military today. They realized it was something that worked. It was a good idea. They were on the phone seconds later telling all their other teams that, hey, we can use bubble wrap or things to disguise our thermal imaging. And when a sniper's out on a hide, it potentially will keep us from getting hit by a drone. And that's probably one of the few things I actually taught them besides how to use the ballistic calculators and some of the other high-tech stuff we have.
What's your thought on the war in general? Like you said, you wanted to talk about this because you're passionate about it.
I am.
Want to say your piece on that? And
I may get emotional. Several of the guys that I helped train have either been wounded or killed. Mm-hmm. Some of them I got real close to. We don't hear the real story. And I would say our media is effing clueless and deceptive on what's really going on over there. The majority of our news reporters are buying their footage and never go anywhere near the front lines. They're staying either in a nice hotel in Kyiv or Lviv, and they never go out there. And their upper administrations won't let them go out there. When you see their frontline stuff, I think it's staged. And this is coming from military and civilians I've talked to. The reporting isn't actually what's going on. The Russians are targeting churches, schools. They target all the easy civilian targets. I've seen the mass graves. I've seen the churches and the schools that have, not from aerial bombing, but been hit by tanks. I mean, which is a direct, tank aims at this house. It's very intentional. And every little burg or village they go through, they'll send a tank round through the nicest house in the village, through the poorest house, and an average house. And it's just to show them that none of you are safe. It doesn't matter whether you're rich, poor, or average. We're here to conquer you. And a tank round is very easy to spot. The front of there'll be a hole and it's kind of burned, and then the roof and the back of the walls burned out because the tank round hits, goes through, penetrates, and then it explodes, and the damage is done inside and on the out. And I've seen dozens, if not 60 or 70 buildings of all kinds. I can show you in phone that they're targeting civilians. Just horrendous. And as I mentioned before, everybody I've met, and I traveled a lot by train and by private vehicle, as well as with the military, because the third trip, my wife went over there with me to help donate time. She worked on ghillie suits, actually. And
wow. So what prompted you to do this in the first place? Did they call you? Did someone call you, or did you?
Yeah, when I was in Afghanistan, flying the Plattus Porter, I didn't fly very much. I had a lot of time off. They had a range at the FOB I was out. Long range shooting is a passion and a hobby of mine. So I got to spend a lot of time on the range shooting free government ammo. Once a week or twice a week, a Polish team would come through as they were coming through the FOB and overnight. And I got to meet this Polish captain who was half Polish, half Ukraine. My great-grandmother was Ukraine, though I knew nothing more about Ukraine than that. And we kind of developed a friendship. He'd shoot there at the range when they would sometime. He called me up out of the blue 3 days after the war started and said he'd retired out of the Polish military, drove across, and they made him a captain and gave him 60 raw recruits that had no law enforcement and no military training at all. He only had one other person with any kind of military training, and he asked if I'd come over and help teach firearms and do some long-range training, long-range shooting instruction. And that's what got me over there, and didn't get to rendezvous with him the first time because before I could get there, he wound up on the front lines, and he's also been killed. But so that's why I wound up doing the humanitarian work the first trip. And then through him and some other people, I wound up getting involved with I think it's the 23rd Separatist Rifle Battalion.
Let's wrap up this part. Just tell me what you think the solution is. How's it going to end?
Putin and Zelensky have both drawn hard lines in the sand. And I think the only way it can end is for Trump to hardball both of them. Zelensky, and the battle cry is all of Ukraine, that meaning they won't give up and they won't stop fighting till they retake and have Crimea back. Russia has basically said, we're never going to give Crimea back or any of the territory we've taken since. My personal opinion, a solution would be make Crimea a demilitarized zone where neither Russia or Ukraine can have any military equipment there. And that is a mixture of Russian and Ukraine people, and let that be just almost its own independent area where the Russians and the Ukrainians can coexist without a military pushing one way or another. I think any Ukraine, especially my friends in the military that would hear me say that, would be very mad at me. And of course, the Russians would think that was blasphemy. I would love to see Ukraine get Crimea back, but I just don't know how that can be done. But I'll also say I've never seen more committed people. They will never give up. Russia could occupy Ukraine, but they'll never give up. And Russia's goal is not Ukraine. They have to have Ukraine because of Antonov and all the aviation manufacturing stuff that's in Ukraine and all of the infrastructure that Ukraine has that Russia needs for their military. But Russia's goal is really upfront and simple. They want to retake all of the former Soviet Union, and when that's done, they want to capture all of Europe.
Really?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've heard that from a Russian colonel.
Yeah, that's not something you hear in the media.
No. And he was just like, this is plain knowledge. And actually, Putin is somewhat of a moderate compared to a lot of our top generals.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
It is crazy. And this is what's scaring me. I've got grandkids and kids that as soon as Russia goes into Poland or any other NATO country, we're committed. And now right now it's the Ukrainian men and women bleeding and dying to keep Russia at bay. But if Ukraine is occupied and Russia keeps going, it's going to be my kids, your kids potentially fighting in the next world war, dying over there. And that I don't want to see my grandkids or even my kids fighting. And right now it's the Ukraine. It's a David versus Goliath situation. And
yeah. So hang on. Let me look at what else we have here. So you flew with Blackwater.
Yes.
In Afghanistan.
Right. The winters of 2008, 9, and 10. I basically was over there for a good portion of each winter. Originally, I was hired to fly a Platus Porter on some classified stuff that I won't talk about. After those short trips ended and the Platus project ended, I wound up right seat in a Casa 212. In the Casa 212s, we were flying from forward operating base to forward operating base. I actually spent most of my time living in a forward operating base, which we call a FOB, delivering mail, supplies, and troops all over the country of Afghanistan. And again, I was not captain, I was right seat, doing what's called the low altitude drops, which Blackwater developed. The military does a dropping supplies out of C-130s at 2,000 feet or 1,000 feet, about the lowest. That parachute opens, it brings the supplies down. All works great, except the Taliban can see for 50 miles exactly where our troops are. So the CASAs would fly 50 feet above the earth, just fall a nap of the earth, get to where the actual final destination was, pull up hard, go to 400 feet, push it into a negative G. They push a pallet out with a parachute. It opens, it swings once, its second pendulum, it's coming back, and it's on the ground.
So that pallet is weightless when they push it? I mean, is that?
Yeah. Yep.
Man.
And then you're only at that 400 feet for a short time and then back to nap of the earth. So they can't see for miles that a parachute opened. And as they're flying along, you're not only doing that up 400 feet and down. They do that occasionally anywhere, just so this airplane is, doing it. And when the parachute comes out, they're dropping water, MREs, ammo, whatever supplies to these special ops teams that are outside doing their special ops to resupply them, fuel, whatever they wanted.
What an incredible thing.
And there are a lot of pilots from Alaska. In fact, Blackwater Aviation side was built by Alaska pilots.
Can you talk about that?
Sure. There was a pilot up here, military jet jock by the name of Lance Carey. Lance was career military, stayed in. They wouldn't let him stay in Alaska any longer, and so he volunteered to do some extra stuff to stay. And meanwhile, he started out as a dock boy for either Ketchum or Rust. I think it was Ketchum. And was getting right seat beaver time. So the day he retired, he had a job with Ketchum or Rust, I don't remember which one it was, flying beavers. Did that, then went up to Bettles, flew bush stuff up at Bettles for Bettles Lodge. And then the whole Blackwater war thing was really or the Afghan war was going, and they wanted somebody with mixed experience, both bush flying experience and the military experience, and they hired Lance as their chief pilot. And he wouldn't hire anybody if they didn't have at least a couple seasons flying in Alaska. Because what he found pretty quickly was in Alaska, our guys flying all the villages, you're loading and unloading your airplane, you're fueling your own airplane, you're living in substandard living conditions, and that was what Afghanistan was. And so the pilots from Alaska were used to thinking on their own, flying low level, loading the airplanes, and whenever they would get former military pilots or airline pilots, they couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle living conditions. They were pissed. They were
That's so funny.
loading 3,000 pounds by hand into a casa.
No offense, guys.
It's true. It's just a different lifestyle, and the guys that could, or gals that could handle what we do here in the bush in Alaska worked perfect.
Wow.
And so the Blackwater thing was really built with Alaska pilots flying casas and other aircraft. I think almost 3/4 of the people that I flew with over there, if not more, all had at least a couple years flying in Alaska.
To kind of round this podcast out, I really appreciate you coming and everything. This has been incredible. Do you have any kind of final stories, that pivotal moments flying, that you want to share?
As we talked about earlier, the FAA really could have crucified me when I was caught doing what I shouldn't have been doing. And one of the things that they made a deal with me, they gave me my license back a little early if I promised to wear a helmet, flight helmet. Because I was told, you're flying Super Cubs. Most Super Cub accidents are survivable with a helmet. The majority, over 85% of the fatalities in a Super Cub are head related that are survivable with the helmet. And so I kept my promise. I've worn a helmet 99% of my flying since then. Every now and then I get in an airplane. I don't have one. It's somebody else's airplane or something, but I made it mandatory in my operation that all my pilots wore helmets.
I love that.
Twice now, pilots have crashed my Cubs, totaled the Cub, and neither time would they have survived if it hadn't been for the helmet. Both times the helmet, without a doubt, saved their life. Helmet was destroyed. Both times they almost died, severe back injuries, but the head injury was prevented. And if they'd had any kind of head injury with everything else, they wouldn't have survived. And both of them whined, bitched, moaned about wearing a helmet, that I made them do it, and neither of them will ever fly without a helmet again now. So I think helmets are a big deal. The statistics Cessna came up with when they reintroduced the 206 was that, I believe it was 84% of single-engine daytime VFR crashes, the fatality could be prevented if you could stop the head injury. And Cessna's answer was the airbags and the seat belts, but a helmet does the same thing at a fraction of the cost.
Some advice for a new pilot. I kind of asked this because I think my audience, probably most of them, are kind of like me, a recreational pilot. Hey, I've been flying 150 or 172 at the flight school, get my pilot's license, buy a Taylor craft. Hey, it's got bush wheels on it. I'm going to go do some bush flying. And so can you talk to me as that person and tell me how not to kill myself?
Get with somebody that's got some real life experience, and don't just go out and start doing the gravel bars and that. Get somebody that can actually be a mentor to you. I think that's really huge. I had Larry Rivers as my mentor. If I hadn't had him teaching me to fly Cubs way in my early years, I'd have never survived. There's no doubt in my mind I'm sitting here today, and I wouldn't be if it wasn't for Larry Rivers.
That's incredible. You lucked out on that.
I really lucked out. Absolutely. Larry blessed me in a lot of ways, helped me in business, but find somebody that can be a mentor. Flight instructors today, so many of them go from student pilot to private to commercial and to build time as a flight instructor, and they have no real world experience. And though they're great for learning your instruments and getting you through your basics, they're not the person to think about going and flying with in the backcountry. In fact, my insurance agent wants 50% more hours if somebody has a CFI before they can come on board than if they don't, because she's seen the statistics that a CFI that's gone from student pilot to instructor and built all their hours that way never has to think outside the box of what we do here. So find somebody that, a Larry Rivers, a Bill Breeden, there's lots of guys that are flying out here. Larry Rivers' daughter, Robin, she's got an amazing life story
and she's someone that's going to be around for a while.
Yes.
In a sense that, Larry Rivers, he may not want to take on some new kid, right? He's already done that. He already did that with you and countless others.
Yep.
And so, but she's there.
Yep.
Someone she's an excellent.
She's a very good instructor. She flew for us one year up at the lodge. Her husband, Riley, another great one. Don Lee's daughter, Missy Lee, and Alaska Floats and Skis. Again, a real world backcountry experience with tremendous knowledge to teach. So even in Alaska, or right here in Alaska, we're really lucky. There's a flight school in Idaho. I don't remember what its name is, out of McCall, that teaches mountain flying and some backcountry stuff. And then there's Alaska bush pilots all over the country that have retired from here and are in Florida or Arizona. And it may take some searching, but there's some great pilots out there that can be mentors on this world.
That was kind of going to be my next question, is you were giving some specific names, but how do you, and what kind of criteria, and how do you find that person and seek them out? And my thought, can I just say one thing about that? Just like this podcast, it's always the people that I really want on, that really have the wisdom and the understanding and the experience, that are the hardest to get. You know what I mean? And I think that as a new person, I feel like it would be really hard to sift through that and find someone that's really has the experience to mentor.
Well, I think there's a couple of good sites, supercub.org. You can go on there and ask, and
that's a good idea.
And then Backcountry Pilots Association, it's a website. That's another great one with some really good articles and some, just online learning. And I think you can put an ad in, ask, hey, is there anybody in Bozeman, Montana that has got real backcountry experience that could do some instruction or be a mentor, or Fort Lauderdale, Florida, or wherever. Because everywhere I go, somebody asks, do you know such and such? He was an Alaska pilot, and third of the time I do. And so there's great pilots all over the country.
I love the idea of going and saying, who do we know that's an Alaska pilot, and talking to them, my pilot friends outside, they always get offended when we put the Alaska pilots on a pedestal, but
it's different up here. And I look at bush flying as there's a lot of people call themselves bush pilots, and they are. The guys flying the village to village, they're putting up with horrible weather, schedules, living remote. It's a tough, loading and unloading 1,000 pounds of soda pop and groceries into a 207 every day, or caravan. That's a kind of bush flying. It's not the kind of bush flying that Larry Rivers and I did, where you're flying a heavy cub, pioneering airstrips, 15 to 50 airstrips, pioneered a season, because you don't want to have to pack a moose any farther than you have to. And that's a completely different kind of bush flying. And then you've got what I call the competition stole flying, which the skill level is amazing, and the equipment that's been developed kind of started by Greg Miller and his Big Rocks Long Props videos, but it doesn't what we do here. It's still looking at new places to land, figuring out how to do it, building equipment to do it, and we've benefited from that almost race car mentality.
Right?
Some of the stuff they've built hasn't worked. but 35-inch bush wheels. That's Greg Miller. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that was developed from that race car kind of mentality. But that competition isn't flying a heavily loaded Cub, pioneering airstrips every time because you have to, not because you want to, flying in when the weather's bad, flying when you're not feeling good because you're flying 5-6 days a week.
Yep.
So it's different. So there's so many different aspects of bush flying, and that STOL competition. I mean, we're still learning new stuff in the tech. There are a lot of STOL pilots out there that they'll get in and out of places that I can't go. That far more skill. That skill level keeps getting better, and the equipment keeps getting better. So just because somebody's in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, or Ohio, doesn't mean they're not a great pilot at that style of flying.
Yeah, I think that also, from my limited perspective, is that there's so many different types of flying. It's like if you're going to go and talk about landing on a river or something, that's one thing. Flying in mountains, it's another thing. And this person may be a total expert at that and not at this. And
yep,
so you got to think and when you're going into new situations, find a mentor for that situation.
Yeah. Well, I've got 4 other pilots flying for me right now, and I'm the least qualified to fly this new PC-12 that we've got. They've all more qualified. I'm a baby in learning to fly that airplane. So it's just a different world. And I guess I wanted to talk about one other thing. You asked about hints and tips. I was just talking to Aubrey, this newest pilot flying for us, and I was telling her, I said, we're flying through Lake Clark Pass today. We went back and forth twice. And I said, you never want to fly past your turnaround point. When the weather gets low, you're looking ahead. That's a turnaround point. You don't go beyond that. But it's way more than that. I want you to look at that turnaround point, and I want you in your head mentally say, I am turning around there, because I can see I can turn around there. And I'm committed. I'm turning around there, and I'm set up to do it. Because when you get there, if it is in fact no other turnaround point, you're already prepared mentally and physically. You've slowed down, you've got a notch of flaps in, and you do the turn. If you're just looking at, okay, there's a turnaround point, I'll go there, and then I'll make the decision. You go there, now your brain takes a while to realize, oh, I have to turn around, not just that was a turnaround point. And that time delay, that few seconds, can be the difference between life and death. And so mentally, in my head, I want to say, the weather's bad, I don't know what's around that corner, but I can see I can turn around there. I'm going to turn around there. I'm setting up. I'm going there to turn around. And when I get there, I can see the narrows is clear. Okay, is there a turnaround point? I'm still in that process of making that turn, both physically and mentally. And there's a point I can see enough room to turn around. I can do that safely. Then I can divert. Or I can even do that 360 and then continue into the narrows and go to the next turnaround point.
Oh, I was going to ask if you would do a 360 there, just because and as you're turning, you may get a clearer view.
Exactly. And today when we flew through, I did we were in the Beaver, so it's fairly slow, and it was Bluebird day. I told her, I said, right here is where you do your 360, and then come around, and you'll see out that right-hand window as you're doing your left-hand 360. Yeah, I'm not going any far, not going to go into the narrows, or I can see the far end of the narrows. There's enough room to turn around, do the 360 and go.
So a turnaround point is somewhere where it's wide enough for you to
wide enough to turn your airplane in the load that it has and your skill level.
Got it. Man, that's really wise. Well, what else? Are we done?
One of the things that, again, I got from both Larry and Tom Wardley early on in my flying career was, if you do something to the airplane, switch fuel, flat motor, or anything, and all of a sudden something bad happens, undo the last thing you just did. And I shut the fuel off on a Wilga on me once. I'd taken off with my neighbor Eric Salatan and one of his friends to go spot some sheep for their subsistence hunting. And I was about 400 feet. I switched tanks on the Wilga. Well, the Wilga isn't 90-degree turns, it's quarter turns. And when I turned at 90 degrees, I shut the fuel off. Shortly thereafter, the engine quit. And I immediately went right back and undid what I did, and the engine was caught back up and it was fine. So that's an example of, if you do something and then something bad happens immediately afterwards, undo what you just did last.
That makes so much sense.
One of the things that Larry taught me is in a Cub, we're all taught to pull carb heat first, is the first thing we do when the engine quits or starts to sputter. In a Cub or a Beaver, I would say no. Switch tanks first, because that's more than likely what's caused your engine to switch, and then grab carb heat. I would switch tanks first and then grab carb heat, because more than likely you've just run a tank dry.
Interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, because it's just a little more time. If you're low or something, you're not going to have the ability to restart that, maybe.
Yep.
It'll be too slow by the time it...
Yep. And so, my emergency procedure is switch tanks, carb heat. Of course, I'm looking for where I'm going to land if I have to, and then go through the rest of the procedures.
So do you run it out and then switch it?
I never run them dry. I run them by the clock, by my watch. Timex, by the way. I run it by the watch and the fuel gauge, hopefully they both are always comparing equally, but I don't run them out. I'd rather be 50 pounds over gross and have extra fuel on a long flight than be at gross weight and have a marginal fuel situation. I'm vice president of Katmai Service Providers, and our secretary lost her son in a 170 a couple years ago, flying, I think, trying to do catch a can to Friday Harbor, Washington, and ran out of gas just short and wound up in the salt water out there in the Sound and was never found. And that was a fuel issue. I think, as horrible as that was, it would have been better to illegally land in Canada and throw in a 5-gallon can of fuel and have that fuel range, or land in Canada and have to call customs, which would really be the right way to do it, and get
in trouble
and get some extra fuel, and then not be just 5 miles short of your destination and have to ditch it in the salt water and not survive.
I agree. Well, listen, man, this has been awesome. I've learned a lot. I've been looking forward to talking to you for over a year now. I appreciate you coming in. It's big. This is big time.
Yeah. One of the things I like to tell young pilots is I didn't survive my early career flying because I was good. I survived because of the grace of God, and I was lucky. And thankfully I learned some hard lessons. Even though I had great mentors, I still did some stupid things. And, it was the grace of God that kept me here. It wasn't my skill, that's for sure.
That's a great way to go out on the podcast. That's a great ender. I appreciate it. All right. Thanks for watching. You obviously enjoyed this content, so please subscribe to our channel, comment, let us know what you thought. And if you want to support our ability to make more episodes, visit coffeeinahanger.com and subscribe to our email list. Thank you.